early slate on Monday, April 2nd, 2018. Um, I am Nick Colley, and I'm joined as always with Matt Meiselman. Hey, Matt, how was your weekend?
Pretty good. Baseball still isn't going that great, but I think we're going to turn it around soon. Although I would have felt a little better if the Yankees were playing, but we'll see if we can figure something out here.
Yeah, I agree. It's rough, a little bit of a rough, early and main slate as far as it goes pitching wise, but I think we have our, top two favorite options for the pitching. Hopefully, we can figure out the batters. What do you like as far as pitching goes for this early
Okay,
slate?
so I think we have one pitcher that is the standout option, and then I think we have a few other choices. And I think I'll mention FanDuel here too, because the pricing is just so different between the pitchers. Jameson Taillon is the most expensive pitcher on the early slate on FanDuel. And on DraftKings, it's Zach Davies, and I guess Tyler Chatwood is the most. That game is not on the FanDuel slate. They left off the Cubs game. But Zach Davies is more than Taillon by, I think it's a few hundred. Just getting the DraftKings prices up again. But
It's
Taillon is way underpriced on both sites. Let me get the exact numbers. 8.2K for Taillon on FanDuel. Davies is 7.1. And then on DraftKings, Taillon's 8.8 and Davies is, I think it was 9.4. It's loading. Here we go. 9.6 for Davies. Jameson Taillon is a better pitcher than Zach Davies for sure. And he's got an easier matchup. He's in a better park, better weather conditions. It's just everything is better for him. So the pricing is just wrong. And I think there's a lot of value on Jameson Taillon. The line movement, definitely agree, is the Pirates. The game opened as a pick'em, and the public is on the Twins. And even with the public bias towards the Twins, the Pirates are up to, the line is minus 126 or so right now. And the over-under is also dropped from 8.5 down to almost 7.5. So it's the line movement is all anti-Twins offense. It's not really pro-Pirates offense. But it definitely supports Jameson Taillon. So all good indicators there. I think he's by far the strongest pitching option on the early slate.
Yeah, I would say I have to agree with you. Outside of Taillon, it just every other starting pitcher seems to have a red flag of some sorts. But on DraftKings, we will be forced to roster two pitchers. So, who are you most inclined to, lean on as far as your second pitcher goes? I would have to guess it's going to be someone from this Royals-Tigers game.
Yeah, I think it has to be. The problem is no one else is good, but there are pitchers in very good situations. Francisco Liriano last year was just awful. He's had strikeout upside in the past. He's also just been walk prone basically his whole career. I mean, maybe not like at his absolute peak, but for the most part, Liriano is very walk prone. Last year was something like 7.5 Ks per nine and 4.5 walks per nine. So he's nowhere near a good pitcher. Let's see if this Tigers lineup is out though, because they played a doubleheader yesterday. So they could be resting some guys. Okay, we do have it out, but it looks like everyone for the most part is in there. Let's see. A couple names we don't recognize, but I'm not sure who's missing. They have a lot of young players. I mean, it's Cabrera and Castellanos are the two most important hitters for them. They're both in the lineup.
Yeah. Sorry, are you speaking?
Oh yeah, but the matchup for Liriano against the Royals still don't have Salvador Perez, so I guess that's a much easier matchup than it normally would be, because they're going with three lefty hitters in their first four guys. Whit Merrifield's the only righty in the 1 through 4 in the order, and then everyone else after that is just not very good. Chesler Cuthbert actually has decent platoon splits, but he's not playing. So this is a really weak Royals lineup for Liriano to be facing. I mean, he's bad, but he's facing about as bad of an offense as you can have. And the weather is mid to high 30s, and the wind is blowing in a bit. It's going to be very cold. I mean, the ball's not going to be carrying. So that's the one thing Liriano really has going for him. I guess the matchup too, but the hitting conditions are bad and the offense is bad. So if he can just be mediocre, that would be awesome, because then the results will probably be very good.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the only route to go that I see. I do think that these two will be the highest owned pitchers. That's something you think? I think Lance Lynn merits some consideration, but the this new look Pirates lineup seems to have like a bit more power and there's a couple lefties and switch hitters and
Well, I think Lynn actually could be one of the higher owned guys because he is someone who has really outperformed his peripherals. Well, last year he did. Lynn, I'll get the specific numbers in a second, but Lynn has pretty big home road splits, and he also has big righty lefty splits. Like where it's a lot worse for him on the road and against lefties. And the Pirates lineup generally is very left-hand heavy. Let's see what we got today. All right, Polanco's in there. Bell, switch hitter, about left-handed. Dickerson, Colin Moran, someone notable not in there. Adam Frazier's not playing, but they still have a few lefties. I guess there are enough righties where it's not the worst matchup. So I don't know. Lynn just isn't very good. Like for the year last year, his ERA was 3.43, but his FIP was 4.82 and his xFIP was 4.75. 7.4 Ks per nine, 3.8 walks per nine. It's just like kind of a below average pitcher. I mean, I'm not particularly excited about him, and he's not that cheap. I think him and Tyon are they're roughly the same price.
yeah, I don't see any pricing value on Lance Lynn. He's historically not a dominant pitcher, and like you mentioned. But what about this Reds Cubs game? Tyler Chatwood, newly acquired Chicago Cub over this past offseason. He was in Colorado before. He's never been priced at 10.1K. I'm assuming you have no interest in paying that much for Tyler Chatwood.
Yeah, I definitely don't. This is going to be a strange slate the way it sets up ownership wise now, because I think the two most popular sides of any game were going to be the Yankees offense against the Rays, and then Jordan Montgomery pitching against the Rays, who have a bad offense and are especially bad against lefties, and they strike out a lot. So it's kind of just the perfect fantasy matchup. So without Montgomery there and without the Yankees offense there, the hitting choices are going to have to be cheaper. The Yankees were the most expensive offense, and I think you would have seen more ownership on cheaper pitching. But now the Yankees aren't playing, so if you're using cheaper hitters, then you have more room to pay up for more expensive pitching. And I think because of that, people will gravitate towards Tyler Chatwood just because they have the salary. I think a lot of people just don't know what they're doing. They look at Chatwood's contract the Cubs gave him. They look at his price on DraftKings, and they would say, all right, he's got to cost that for a reason, right? So I think Chatwood gets some ownership. I have zero interest in using him. I don't really understand why the Cubs signed him to such a big deal in the first place. I mean, his numbers are definitely worse because of Coors Field by a decent amount, but he was pretty awful there. I mean, 4.7 walks per nine doesn't really translate at any ballpark. So maybe Chatwood becomes a decent pitcher for the Cubs. The problem for DFS is that he's not a strikeout pitcher. He's kind of a moderate K rate, high walk rate, and very high ground ball rate. So he's kind of a better real life pitcher than he is a fantasy pitcher. He should put guys on base, maybe get some double plays. He's not going to strike a lot of guys out. And he also probably doesn't pitch deep into games either because he's walking so many hitters. And the Reds lineup isn't bad. So like I think it's a bad matchup for Chatwood, and he's probably average at best, and he's on the road. So I have zero interest, and I hope people use him. So when we get to offenses, I guess we can talk about the Reds. But do you like Chatwood? And I guess what are your thoughts on Zach Davies? Because we're going to have to cover him also.
I have no interest in either of them. The problem with both of them is, like you've mentioned, is their price tags. To me, I don't. Both of them, have underlying peripherals that just don't really translate to being a good pitcher, and they're going against offenses that could be somewhat undervalued, I think, based off, the pricing and, just the hitting conditions of the game. So, especially in the Brewers game, I don't think Zach Davies ever merits 9.6K. Did he ever make it up this high last year? in pricing?
I don't think so. That seems very steep. I mean, let me see they only showed the last 10 games here on DraftKings.
Never been 9.6K.
Yeah.
He was actually 9.2 in September of last year in Miami. That was his highest point.
Yeah, he had negative fantasy points in that game. Zach Davies is okay. He has outperformed his peripherals, I think, every year. I'll pull up his numbers real quick. But he's probably just average. It's also not a particularly good matchup for him. Home against the Cardinals, in theory, sounds okay. But being home field pitcher for the Brewers doesn't really help much because Milwaukee is a hitter's park. So I guess the park factor kind of offsets the home field advantage. Davies had a 3.90 ERA last year, 4.22 FIP, 4.42 xFIP. He doesn't strike guys out either. He was under 6 Ks per 9. In 2016, he was in the 7s. I'm just looking at swinging strikes to see if there's any reason for optimism. 7.2% swinging strikes is probably the low. I mean, I can't remember seeing any starting pitchers who were lower than that actually stay in their team's rotations. So even though Davies and Chatwood could have decent games, like I think it's possible they pitch well. They're probably both right around league average pitchers, just in tough matchups. I mean, guys in those situations sometimes just limit run production. They don't have strikeout upside. And the Reds in Cincinnati maybe strike out a little more than average, but it's a hitter's park there, and it's a hitter's park in Milwaukee. There really isn't much reason to expect upside from either of those guys. Jameson Taillon actually strikes guys out. He's at home against the Twins, who are losing the DH today because they're playing in the National League. And I didn't realize that. Well, I guess Greg and I had speculated about it on the podcast last night, who the Twins would rest because they have to sit one of their first basemen between Joe Mauer and Logan Morrison. Lomo is definitely a better hitter than Mauer, but Mauer is the one that's in the lineup today. So this is a weaker Twins offense than we would normally expect. They're playing all their regulars, but they don't have Logan Morrison in there, so that's a boost for Taillon also.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you on that. And what was it? I said, anyways, let's move to hitting. This is where things get tricky. Ideally, I mean, the Cubs are, the desired stack going against Tyler Mahle. I
think it's Mahle. I think that is how you say it.
Well,
I'm not sure.
Mahle, it could be.
I don't think it is, but it could be, I guess. If anyone, it's someone type in the chat box if you actually know how to pronounce Tyler Mahle or Mahle's last name. It's a few people there.
There's not a big sample size. He pitched 20 innings, last season. He didn't actually give up a home run to either side of the plate in 20 innings, but he was slightly worse against left-handers. But then again, there's not really much on him. He doesn't look to be good at all. 4.5 K per 9 against lefties.
He has good minor league numbers. I think we're looking at someone who's probably not ready yet to be a decent starter, but I think he should be a decent starter at some point. So, like, if you just go by the fact that he's a young pitcher who doesn't have much experience, I think people will gravitate towards the Cubs because of that. But I don't know that he's necessarily bad. So it's tough to say. I guess while we're on pitching, we should probably cover potentially using him and then maybe just fill in the guys we haven't talked about yet before we really dive into the offenses. Because at this point, it sounds like we're only using Francisco Liriano and Jameson Taillon. Well, I definitely don't want that to be the case for me personally. Like Taillon, I could see having in every one of your lineups, but Liriano, I think 50% at most. Like I'd want to have exposure to other pitchers. So Tyler Mahle could be one of them, especially if the Cubs are going to be popular, kind of as a leverage play against them. Because without the Yankees on the slate, the Cubs are really the only team to pay up for. The other guys to consider, we have Jason Hamill at 7.8K. Not a very good pitcher, but he's in the same conditions Liriano is in, where it's cold. It's a downgrade in that game. The Tigers' offense is not very good, especially at the bottom of their order. And then we have Miles McCullough, which is the big wild card of the slate. I don't think I would roster him, but I don't know. It's going to be tough figuring out what to do with the Brewers' offense because McCullough hasn't pitched in the major leagues in a while. He was pitching overseas, and this is going to be his debut. His debut back. I don't know. It's impossible to know what's going to happen when a guy goes to Japan for 3 years and then comes back to the majors. And we had Eric Thames last year, but this is not really a usual occurrence. So we have no data really for Mikolas. We have his Japanese stats. We have his major league stats that are 3 years old, and that's about it.
Does he have like a funky windup or delivery? Do you know anything about it? Have you ever seen this guy pitch?
Yeah, I actually don't remember. I watched highlights of one of his spring training starts, and I don't remember what his windup looks like. I think I remember it being fairly normal.
Okay. And did he have a good spring? I was gonna ask, did Zach Davies have a good spring? Is there a reason why he's 9.6K? I really don't understand.
Davies, it's the ERA from last season. He had a sub-4 ERA.
Okay.
I think that's all it is. Mikolas, I don't think had a very good spring. Well, the other thing worth mentioning is that DraftKings seems to have changed the way they do the pitching pricing this year, where they basically need to have an expensive pitcher on every slate. So last year on a slate like this, maybe you wouldn't have seen any pitchers above 9K, but I think they're uncomfortable doing that in terms of lineup construction. So like on the night slate tonight, Charlie Morton is in the 11,000s. Yesterday, there wasn't a really good pitching option, so they priced Jose Quintana in the 11,000s. They're just pricing up the high-end guys relative to the slate. So I think the reason that Chatwood and Davies cost so much is just because no one else costs that much. It should be Tyone. He should be the expensive one, so we have value there. But yeah, I think the pricing on Davies and Chatwood is just because they needed to make someone expensive for some reason.
That makes
sense. And it's Molly, actually. Yeah, we got some help there.
Molly.
Thanks, Abe. Thanks for looking that up. So those other pitchers, like, I think I'd use Molly. I think I'd use some Hamill. I think I'd even take a shot or two on Mikolas, but it drops off pretty dramatically after Tyone. So this is probably a better slate to play on FanDuel, although it's only a 3-game slate now, and on DraftKings it's still 4. But I don't know. The one thing I can say for sure is that Jameson Tyone is the best guy to use, and you're probably better off mixing in your second starter and not just relying entirely on Francisco Liriano, even though I do think he has the best value of any of those guys. But we can move on to hitting because I think we've established where we're going with the pitching stuff, unless you have something else. Like, what do you think you'll do with the number 2 starter? Just diversify, or all in Liriano?
Definitely not all in Liriano. I've learned in the past 3 days that it's never good to go even, heavier than I wouldn't go over 50. I would maybe not even go 50% on Liriano. I think it's all.
If Sale and Kluber are both pitching, you can go all in on both pitchers, but that's all in the time.
Yeah, and especially on a short slate like this, it's like, there's always merit to using some of these other guys for pure just-in-case purposes, because you can mix and match offenses with just about any of these guys. So if, Mail, especially for ownership reasons, and Hamill is predominantly not a good pitcher, but going up against this, really crappy fucking, excuse my French, Tigers offense, he should be able to return a decent game. I'm gonna pull up his stats right now. Do we know if he's like a reverse splits?
I think Hamill actually might be, which would be a problem for him. Let me see that. Either way, he's been good in the past. He was just bad last year, so maybe he has a bit of a bounce back. But he's not young. Hamill is 35 years old. So I think it just makes sense he'd be having a decline now. Like, I don't think you go from your age 33 to 34 season and have a drop off in basically every conceivable way that someone can pitch, and then in your age 35 season you just return to form. Like, that doesn't generally happen. So it's possible, but I think Hamill will just continue his downward trend. He was a little unlucky last year. He had a 5.29 ERA, 4.37 FIP, 4.92 xFIP. Either way, none of that is very good. He doesn't strike a lot of guys out. I mean, it's a low upside play. I think it's just if you have to use someone that's not Liriano and Tyone, I think Hamill is the next guy, but I don't have a lot of confidence in him.
After looking at these stats, I think I may lean towards Mail just for ownership reasons and upside reasons.
Yeah, I think the ownership is the main thing. I don't think Hamill will be low owned, but Molly does have the leverage. That's what's working for him. But I think Hamill and Molly will both be very low owned. Like ownership wise, before we get into offense, I think the highest owned pitcher on the slate probably would have been Jordan Montgomery, maybe Jameson Taillon. I think it would have been close, but it should be Taillon now. But I don't think he'll be high enough where you have to fade him or anything. Like I think it'll be still pretty spread out where a lot of people use Tyler Chatwood, a lot of people use Zach Davies. I think he could potentially even be the highest owned pitcher. And then I think Lance Lynn will get a decent amount of ownership too. And maybe some people use Liriano. I don't know. But I don't think any pitcher will be more than 40%. On a 4-game slate, I think that's fine.
Yeah, Hamill is a really fly ball prone pitcher, and he gave up a ton of hard hits.
He should be fine in these conditions because of the cold, and he's got a little help from the wind. So giving up a lot of fly balls today might not even be a bad thing. But he's bad enough he could still let up some homers. Liriano too.
Has his velocity been going down? I guess that's like an obvious trend, but
I think just slightly. His average fastball for his career is 93.3. He topped out in 2012. He was 94.5. And last year he was 92.5, which I think that's his career low. It's just been a very slight downward trend because he's gotten older. He's had a pretty normal aging curve.
Yeah, because he had the exact identical weighted on base against both handedness last season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just no splits. All right. So do you think you're using the Cubs offense, or I guess let's figure it out. I can't.
I mean, I tried to make lineups with Liriano, Taillon, and the Cubs. We don't have a Cubs lineup. I used the projected first 5 batters. You can do it, and then you have I think 3,100 to spend on remaining batters, but your remaining plugs are they're all going to be 8 or 9 guys. 8. I mean, guys hitting at the bottom.
It's an expensive stack, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, okay, so the guys you'd have in there are Happ, Bryant, Rizzo, Contreras, and Schwarber. I think that's going to be their 1 through 5 today.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Almora only plays versus lefties. And, yeah, that seems like it, unless they move Jason Hayward up into the top of the order or something. Okay, so, I don't really think I'll go there much. I think the Cardinals are interesting because they're cheap. Zach Davies is definitely overrated. And
yeah, I like hitters in both sides of that game.
Yeah, actually, before we get into more hitters, let's see what the Vegas lines look like. So I mentioned the Pirates, a lot of line movement that favors the Pirates and the under. So kind of just a boost to Taillon and no change really to the offensive potential for the Pirates. The sharp money definitely seems to be on the Cardinals side of that game. They opened at plus 110. 70% of the public is betting the Brewers. Line went up a little bit where the Cardinals were plus 115. Now they're back down to plus 105. There's movement towards the over too. I think we actually saw a lot of that in Zach Davies' starts last year. But the issue, the Brewers don't have a good bullpen, but they do have Josh Hader. And if they have a lead, Hader will generally pitch mid to late shutdown innings. He comes in for the 6th and 7th, 7th and 8th, something like that. But if the Cardinals are winning, it's a lot less likely that Hader comes into the game. So the stack has upside, but it's not the best value. I think that the play on the Cardinals is a bit of a leverage play against Davies. I think he'll be a little chalky, and I think it has a lot of upside, but I don't think it has a lot of security. It'll definitely be one of the offenses I use, especially now that we have limited options. But I don't feel great about it. I just think they could score a lot of runs and they could score very few runs. And I think they're as boom or bust as any team that's playing today, just because if they get to the Brewers' good part of their bullpen, it's a problem. But if they get to the bad part of the bullpen, then it's massive upside. The Brewers are a little top heavy on the back end. They don't have a lot of reliever depth. It's really just Corey Knebel is a good closer and Josh Hader is good. And they don't have Anthony Swarzak anymore. So they don't really have any other good relief pitchers.
Yeah, so Are the Cardinals going to be your highest owned offense?
Well, it won't be the Royals and Tigers because the conditions there just aren't good enough. Like there's just not a lot of home run upside there. So I think we're left with just the Cardinals and Brewers and then the Cubs. But the other team that's worth considering that I think I will use a decent amount of is the Reds, especially if people are using Tyler Chatwood. But the Reds are not very expensive. Chatwood isn't that good. We have weather issues in Cincinnati that are kind of bringing down the park factor a bit. That's one annoying thing. We have a little bit of wind that's blowing in, and the temperature should be around 50. But the Reds have some decent power hitters. We don't know who's starting for them yet. The Reds should be really low owned because of this situation, just because no one knows who's in their lineup yet. So at lock, people are just going to pick the players mostly from the early games. You usually get a bit of an ownership edge where some of the lineups aren't out when some of the games are starting. So I think people will be off the Reds, and their players aren't that expensive. Like 3.5 and 3.1 for Scooter Gennett and Scott Schebler. Those guys have way too much power for left-handed hitters against a bad righty to be that cheap. And let's call it a neutral park because it's generally a hitter's park, but the weather is bad. Joey Votto is 4.5. The Reds are a lot cheaper than the Cubs, and they're not big underdogs in this game. So that's the other Vegas line to mention. The Cubs are minus 145 or so. But that line definitely seems to be inflated by public bias. It probably should be closer to an even line. So I really like the Reds. I think the Reds and Cardinals would be my two highest owned offenses. And I think I'd also then mix in the Brewers and Cubs because the Brewers and Cubs should be chalkier too. So just for ownership reasons alone, I think it makes sense. But I think it makes sense to use every offense outside of that Royals-Tigers game.
Yeah, I think you convinced me on the Reds too. This is they have a lot of power lefties in the middle of their lineup, and Chatwood was not good against left-handers in particular last season. So the pricing value on the Reds mixed with the ownership and going against the Cubs and against Chatwood is a big thing, and not to mention you can use like expensive Cub plugs around the Reds lineup, around Red stacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely not fading Chris Bryant or Anthony Rizzo or Kyle Schwarber or any Cubs, but I'm just not primarily targeting them. And I don't think I'll entirely fade the hitters from the Tigers and Royals, but definitely just only using them for plugs and not stacking that game because I think the weather will make it tough for that game to have too much upside. The bullpens are bad too, and the starting pitchers are bad. So theoretically, it should be a lot of runs. But most of the hitters just aren't very good. So I have no problem using Miguel Cabrera, Nick Castellanos, Whit Merrifield most likely as a plug. I guess you can use some Royals lefties for when the Tigers right-handed relievers come in. But $4K each for Moustakas and Duda. I mean, the Reds guys are so much cheaper that I just don't think it makes sense to go with the Royals guys. So I think I'd have some exposure to Miggy, Castellanos, and Whit Merrifield, but that's probably it from that game.
Yeah, agreed. And the last game that we haven't touched on hitters-wise is Taillon versus Lynn. The Pirates, they, first take, they look pretty expensive. Do you have any interest in paying, up for Polanco, 4.5? Dickerson, I think there's some value on Corey Dickerson as a plug at 3.7 in outfield. Maybe Josh Bell too, but outside of that, I don't really, see any hitters. And obviously, we're not going to take any Twins hitters.
Yeah, I do think I'll be all in on Jameson Taillon, so no Twins hitters there. The issue I have with the Pirates is just the weather. It's supposed to be cold. Wind is blowing in a bit. But Lance Lynn is still bad on the road and bad against lefties, so I do have interest in Polanco. He's a little expensive. I think Bell is a better play. Dickerson is probably the best play on the Pirates. I think Colin Moran is worth looking at. He's a little pricey for a 7-hitter, but he is left-handed, and I don't think he's that bad. Josh Harrison's leading off, so there's some value on him at 3.8. Starling Marte is expensive, so I think it's kind of just plug in the Pirates. I don't think I'll have any full stacks of them. But they do correlate with Taillon for the win bonus. So I think it would make sense to get at least one Pirates hitter in most lineups as a plug. They're just a little expensive. So I guess the reason it could work is if you're stacking the Cardinals and you're stacking the Reds, there is going to be some salary left over where the plugins can be in the 4,000, 4,500 range. So then it's not really too hard to fit these Pirates guys in, and I think some of them are worth using. So would you agree Bell and Dickerson are probably the two guys to target from the middle of the order?
Yeah, Bell. Yeah, both Bell and Dickerson in part two. Yeah, Dickerson 3.7. There seems to be a lot of value. He has a ton of home run upside, as we learned from Tampa last season. The Brewers lineup just came out. Did you see that?
Oh, the Brewers didn't. Yeah, we did not mention their lineup. I do think they're worth using, but let's see exactly who we've got here. Yeah, McCullers, I just don't know. I don't know what to expect from him. I don't think anyone does.
Do you have his stats from Japan?
Well, the stuff I was reading on him from Fangraphs was saying that his numbers were not as good as Tanaka. They weren't as good as Darvish, but he wasn't so much worse than them. And Kenta Maeda too, but he wasn't so much worse than them where his production should be expected to be awful. But those guys are definitely better than him. His ERAs in Japan for the 3 years were 192, 245, 225. And let's see. How did they do this? So they ranked all the seasons ERA-wise that McCullers, Darvish, Tanaka, and Maeda had. And his 3 seasons they ranked 10th, 14th, 16th out of the 25 seasons that those 3 guys combined for. So he was in the middle of the pack of what those guys did. I guess he doesn't have close to the high-end talent as them, but maybe he's steadier than they are. I don't know. I think he should be okay, but it is his first start, and it is a hitter's park. So I don't know. Let's see what we're talking about with the Brewers here. What is this lineup they've put out?
Kane, Yelich, the usual suspects. There's no one really missing.
So they're starting Thames at first, Braun in the outfield. So no Domingo Santana okay. So they're going left-hand heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Shaw at 4.2, I think is a little cheap. Like I think this is a fairly expensive stack, and I think it's going to be a popular one. So I don't want to use it too much. But I think the Brewers do make sense for plugs. Like I'm worried about ownership. I think it could be as high or higher than the Cubs. And the prices are just a lot higher than the Cardinals and the Reds. So I think they kind of just fit into that kind of no man's land where I just don't really love the value, but I wouldn't not use their players.
Yeah, I agree. Primarily as plugs. So that about wraps it up, right? Any last thoughts?
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out if there's one position maybe where, now that we only have 4 games, it's kind of condensed where, I don't know. I think we're okay here. Like it's sometimes you get a weird situation where like none of the teams we like have a second baseman, or none of the teams we like have a shortstop. Do the Cardinals have a shortstop? Okay, Paul DeYoung's playing. No, I think that just about does it. Do you have anything else to add? Because I don't know, pretty straightforward. Just to summarize, it's Tyone is the best value, some Liriano, some Hamill, maybe some Molly. I maybe would even do 1 or 2 McCullers lineups if you have a lot of lineups, and then predominantly stacking the Cardinals and Reds with basically everyone else just mixed in.
Yeah. So that does it. Do you want? We're not going to do a show for the late slate, right?
Yeah, we'll do the main slate tomorrow.
Okay. Do you want to just? I guess the podcast sums it up.
Yeah. I guess I'll mention it for the main slate. We have a podcast on. It's on RotoPros.com, and then if you just search Foul Balls Podcast on SoundCloud or iTunes, it's there too. So those are the ways you can find it. And yeah, that has all the info for the main slate. So no YouTube show for that, and we'll be back tomorrow.
All right. Have a good Monday, everyone.